Hello and welcome to the second edition of the Pushing Tin podcast with me, James Field, Editor-in-Chief of Aviation Source News. As usual, I'm joined by my Assistant Editor, Len Varley, and our CEO, Thomas Shah-Howes. Hey guys, how's it going?
G'day.
Hello, good afternoon, and Shamai.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Wow, I mean, it's an interesting start already. We may as well make it even more interesting. Let's get into news, sort of from the last 24 hours regarding Spirit Airlines. They're reported to be in bankruptcy filing talks. So, Len, seeing as you wrote the story this morning, do you want to get into it?
Yeah, so hot off the presses this morning, or coming off the back of Thursday in the United States. The Wall Street Journal broke the news that Spirit Airlines, the ultra low-cost carrier, is in discussions reportedly with respect to Chapter 11 bankruptcy filings. The report actually said that this isn't likely to, if it does go ahead, it isn't likely to be imminent. However, I suppose it doesn't come as a surprise to many people that Spirit are entering into these discussions, given their situation. They haven't been in the black since the pandemic, basically, and as you mentioned, James, they've sort of come off the back of a failed merger with JetBlue, which has been another something of a nail in the coffin for Spirit.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think. I think particularly in America, the increased sort of competition, against, the likes of Southwest, Frontier, even, just to a, kind of a minuscule degree being, Avelo Airlines as well. I think what we're beginning to see is, the low cost and the ultra low cost carriers, they're beginning to adapt their products even further, which, which is going to put pressure on, on that area of the market. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it probably is, I guess, relatively speaking, it's probably something that isn't overly shocking given how the US market's going right now. I mean, you've seen the sort of emergence in the last, 7 years of Breeze as well. That's really put pressure on Spirit that they didn't necessarily have. I guess Spirit would have probably been hoping in some sense that the dysfunction at Southwest would have allowed them to recover from that state. But for whatever reason, it seems that JetBlue and Breeze have been able to capitalize on it far better than they have. So I'm not overly shocked by the news, to be honest. I think Spirit have probably been struggling a little while. I mean, I think if you remember back in 2019, they outright retired all of their A319neos after spending millions upgrading the engine options on them. And that was done as part of a modernization program, but obviously, as we now ultimately really know, it probably wasn't so much modernization as it was an attempt to save costs. Although I'm not sure why you'd upgrade an entire fleet of 30 aircraft's engines before retiring them, but, that's not my decision to make. That's for the Spirit Board to work out. But there we go. Yeah, so I'm not surprised. I personally don't think they will go bankrupt. I think they're far too large of a carrier with too much influence across the US, domestic infrastructure in terms of routes that they operate and stuff like that. You will ultimately see it break down. But, crazy idea, I throw this out there, could you potentially sort of see the airline get split up a little bit like Southwest? Could be a Southwest-Southeast scenario that we look again. Sort of look at that dynamic aspect. I mean, obviously you're going way back in time for when that existed, but there's no reason why that something similar couldn't exist again to help the airline get through these times. But I don't know, we'll have to see. I think ultimately that's probably what it's going to be. It'll be like a Norwegian job is the best modern day example we can give, where they might just subsidize it out into smaller regions and variations to bring costs down. But
Yeah, I think also, another issue that's been, arguably biting Spirit the most has been, the Pratt & Whitney engine issues. Yeah. As well. We have seen airlines already go under because of the Pratt & Whitney issues, such as Go Air in India. They as soon as those issues with Pratt and Whitney emerged, it was kind of a downward cycle for them anyway. We've had other airlines around the world struggling with that issue as well. Even though, the issue is on its way to getting sorted out and fixed, that kind of statement doesn't really make much of a difference if your financials are, effectively down the toilet to the point where, that you're considering Chapter 11. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one turns out, whether it will, go the whole 9 yards in terms of those bankruptcy proceedings or not. But, we obviously wish the best for Spirit in this regard, because if an airline does have to restructure, then, there's going to be job losses, route losses, so it's, it's always a negative for the industry in that regard.
Well, saying negative, sorry, I jump in on this, Lan. Say negative, I mean, I can think of a few carriers globally that might be happy to see those A320 family orders cancelled.
Yeah, maybe True. So. Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah, in Spirit's defence, there were multiple layers to the problem, I think, and James sort of touched on one with the Pratt and Whitney turbofan issues. Spirit was one of the airlines that was hit the hardest by that. I think there was talk of them grounding about 40 aircraft this year as a result. So that was that added to the woes. At the August earnings call, they were 3.3 billion in the red, and they basically signalled that they would be looking at a range of options to refinance that debt and improve their overall liquidity. So as Tom kind of alluded to, there's other options which may come about for them to resolve this issue. And personally, I don't think, as James said, I don't think bankruptcy filings is going to be ultimately the way that the carrier goes with this one.
I guess you can't really another way, I guess, for the people that are watching this podcast or listening to it, if you're not really clued up on Chapter 11, it's ultimately not the end of an airline. It's more of the indication that an airline's currently at a point now where it can't self-sustain, period. So I think the best example of where you might see Spirit likely head is it's probably going to follow down the Avianca route.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the closest match for match in terms of what will likely happen. You'll see a reduction, you'll see cutbacks, but you will outright won't see the removal of the airline. I think their infrastructure is far too established across the bases in the US to really see it get removed. But yeah, I don't know. You feel sorry for Spirit in a way, because ultimately any cutback is going to give Breeze and Southwest room to expand. Particularly Southwest right now, who are struggling. If they get a sniff of expansion into some of Spirit's routes, or Spirit is taken out of competition on their routes, Southwest will welcome that news wholeheartedly.
Yeah, no, they definitely will, and I think even. I think even in the perspective of JetBlue, which arguably has been responsible for these woes in in recent times, I think that'll be something that JetBlue will also be more than happy to sort of capitalize on, especially with the way their pricing structures work at the moment. It's almost like they are a low cost carrier, but they're not. But then they have these premium offerings, but then they're a low-cost carrier again, So I think somehow JetBlue will stand to benefit from this, and I think given the stagnation that's been going on JetBlue's transatlantic side, I think they're also wanting to grow into other markets around the US as well. So, I think this is also another opportunity that they will no doubt exploit if Spirit does go down that route.
Can I throw out a conspiracy theory?
Go on.
What if JetBlue wanted to bring this about over Spirit so that they could merge with them for a much cheaper price without the US being able to stop it?
I mean,
because if the airline's in Chapter 11, the commerce won't stop it.
No, but I think, I don't know, I guess it depends on how the DOJ would respond to that, really, because
I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not making any accusations. I'm not claiming anything to be true. I'm just saying somebody could potentially be benefiting of this type of decision to file for Chapter 11 massively, and it could be JetBlue.
Before this gets clipped out of context and we're
Tom goes down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
I tell you something else that was an inside job.
Oh, grief. Cool. Right. Well, in that case, then I think we should probably move on to our next story. So, the FAA has concluded its review of United Airlines. And after the spate, I think it was anywhere between sort of 8 and 15 incidents over a 2 to 3 week period. The FAA has found no significant safety issues with the airline as a result. Obviously, for those that may remember, the airline went through a series of incidents, both internationally and close at home in the US, from, sort of wheels falling off the landing gear to, an aircraft suffering hydraulic issues twice in one day. There was a lot of kind of worry and concern over United Airlines' sort of, safety. So the FAA decided to audit them. And obviously the FAA now don't see any significant safety issues with the airline. So, Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think before we start, we should give United Airlines their plaudits and a big round of applause. They do, in fact, hold. I will hold up my big mug in celebration to this record because it's.
And I've got to say, what is with that giant mug, Tom? It's larger than you.
Well, it's important in the modern day of hectic rush to stay hydrated. In the hectic rush of modern day life. This stream is not brought to you by Horlicks, by the way. No, but what I was going to say is I just want to congratulate United Airlines for holding a record for the most failed attempts to fly from Rome to San Francisco in a 777. I think that's so impressive, and I just think we should at least give them credit where credit's due. That must be a world record for the number of short flights completed in a 777 fully loaded.
Indeed.
But on a more serious note, I think the language used is probably interesting. Maybe I'm looking a bit too much into it. I mean, I've got no crimes against United. I don't think they're a particularly bad airline. I think they're quite good in comparison to other airlines in the globe, who shall not be named. We love you all. Please sponsor us. I'm jokes. But yeah, I don't think United Airlines have particularly done anything bad. But I don't like the terminology in which they utilise the term "no significant issues" inside their mention. It's that very telling terminology when you utilise something as it's either significant or it's not significant. I personally prefer to go down the line of there just being no issues. So if the report had come out and they said no issues found, I'd have been like, oh, fair enough, it was just a coincidence. The fact they come back with there's no significant problems, because I don't know about you guys, but I qualify a wheel falling off an aircraft more than once as a significant problem.
Yeah.
I think a wheel falling off a plane once is an accident. To fall off the same airline multiple times is more than just an accident.
Yeah,
there's definitely things they would have uncovered, but ultimately I'll give them a little bit of leeway and break as well. I mean, you are looking at aircraft post-COVID. It's not like it was in 2019 where airline and aircraft were being regularly and rigidly maintained and checked and looked after. A lot of these planes were sat in storage for years and just not used. And aircraft, as everyone will know, are not built to be on the ground. They only work in the air. The second they stop flying, they fall apart. Because they're not designed to have ground forces working against them. They're designed to be in the air where there's no resistance. So, well, not the same level of resistance, sorry, I should say, before all the physics boffins come charging in and go, did you know?
Len, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, an interesting point by Tom, because I also kind of read between the lines as I looked at that brief statement by the FAA, no significant safety issues. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that. Certainly there was a string of issues, and they waved goodbye to a fair number of main wheels in the process. An interesting point, which kind of dovetails into other things that have been going on in the last week or so, was one of the incidents that raised attention was the rudder pedal issue with 737-8 MAX, in February with United. So quick recap, that was in Newark. The rudder pedals stuck in the neutral position on landing, and the captain managed to maintain directional control with the tiller, with the nose wheel tiller. That was one of a string of incidents that raised this review in the first place. But the interesting thing with that was this week, with respect to that rudder pedal incident, that threw up an investigation by the NTSB, which, as we talked about, I think last week, found that there was a problem with a rudder actuator. This week, the NTSB sent a letter to the FAA, which was rather scathing of the FAA, saying, essentially, you guys didn't take this seriously until we started this investigation, which I think is quite appropriate on the part of the NTSB. So there's a kind of, these are all interlinked, because this was part of the United string of incidents, which the FAA has investigated and found no significant issues, and the NTSB at the same time has been saying to the FAA, you didn't take this whole thing seriously. So there's a lot of moving parts, I think, with that story.
Yeah, I think so. I think from this week, it's been really telling what the sort of relationship between the FAA and the NTSB has been like, and I think that this has been a relationship that has been observed over the last few years, never mind just this week. There's clearly as you said, Len, a lot of moving parts behind the scenes that maybe this whole argument that has started has begun to show those sort of cracks, and without me going into too much detail about what I did for my university dissertation, it just proves my point even further, that it's just a failure of neoliberal market approaches in the United States, which just all the cracks have shown now. Then the question is now how they're going to fix it, and it isn't just a Boeing problem, it's clearly an FAA problem as well. And maybe to a smaller degree an NTSB issue as well, if agencies can't sort of communicate and coordinate together with each other, then for something is with an urgency of a safety agency, it's just not it's just not good at all.
Yeah, do you know what, right? I'll attack the obvious pun in the room, but ultimately the issue here is a lack of moving parts, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, it's ironic, right? Because we refer to it as like, it's funny because we refer to the incident as like, there's a lot of moving parts to understand the investigation, but ultimately, actually, despite the obvious joke that we made there about the rudder being stuck and that being the lack of moving parts, that is actually the issue in of itself. That for whatever reason we have the scenario where Boeing feels they operate outside of the FAA. The FAA feel like they have to govern Boeing, and the NTSB has sort of just been left out in the lurch, just like I guess you just let us know if something's wrong and we'll just come check it, and if it's all good, it's all good. Because we've been down this road before and we didn't enjoy it, and it led to a lot of deadly accidents across the US, and it brought a lot of major reform across the US, and it changed the way the NTSB was run, it changed the way the FAA was run. And I'm not going to name names, but in case anyone is interested in which aircraft manufacturer brought that across, it was McDonnell Douglas, but that's neither here nor there. There is an incredible book that's been released about it, but I won't release the name. If you want to go search for it, I'm sure it's on Amazon, feel free. And yeah, that honestly speaks to the larger issue. I think you're right. The fact that the NTSB feel the need to not communicate with the FAA, or rather the FAA don't feel the need to tell the NTSB about something, it's really troublesome, because it basically means, and I think this is kind of telling as to what's really gone wrong with the MAX overall, it's like the FAA and Boeing have decided they're above the NTSB. And that is that's a really big problem. And like, if for people to understand the scale of the problem that's now presented itself, I mean, look at the state of Boeing is now in. That's where this type of like, I'm above you scenario leads to. When you think you're above the federal boards that monitor you, that's an issue. Because it's important to remember, The
Yeah.
FAA might be the Federal Aviation Authority, but the NTSB is the National Transportation Safety Board. They are the people that sit in front of Congress and get the approval and the ratings. They're the ones that pick up the pieces at the end of a crash. The FAA aren't the ones rocking up to a crash site and going, what went wrong? It's the NTSB coming to the FAA going, why didn't you just tell us? Because an isolated incident into February, we now know. I mean, thankfully, there's not been more crashes. Because, there is history galore for anyone that wants to read about it, of what it looks like when regulators don't share aircraft problems with each other properly, and what that ends up looking like. I mean, I'm not going to get into the detail of it because we could talk about it for hours, but I'm sure you guys could think of 100 accidents in your mind already in which regulators didn't share information, and it brought around huge change, particularly in Europe. As a good example of that, I mean, the introduction of the EASA and the UK CAA sort of merging together as one global front thing, rather than these independent operations in each country, which didn't really work. And now Europe's got a, relatively speaking, quite a good system. That's not to say that there isn't issues at Airbus, of course there is. But they're not as prominently bad as they are in America, because the way the Americans went about it was just kind of wrong from day one, in essence.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think kind of continuing on the theme of regulators and government agencies, I think this is a good segue into our next story. The US Department of Transportation have fined Air Canada $250,000 for flying over prohibited airspace. So the specific airspace in question was in Iraq. The FAA restricts flights over Iraqi airspace due to security risks in the region. However, Air Canada contravened these rules, according to the DOT. And it was basically on flights between October 2022 and January 2023, where the airline flew several times between the UAE and Canada. But these flights carried the United Airlines code via, code sharing arrangements, but passed through Iraqi airspace, which is off limits to US operators. So that's where the technicality is, bitten Air Canada there. The Office of Aviation Consumer Protection also found that Air Canada kept flying these routes even after receiving a warning letter. So, the DOT is claiming, this has violated, Air Canada's operating authority and amounted to unlawful air transportation. I think, we've had stories like this in the past where airlines, have violated airspace or, violated rules pertinent to, code sharing, operator rules, all that sort of stuff. Tom, do you think this has been more of a deliberate ploy by Air Canada, or do you think this is just, again, an accident which has resulted in an expensive mistake?
I mean, I've got my personal opinions on the whole thing, but I think that's a different type of media outlet altogether that you share those on. I, generally speaking, when it comes to Air Canada, I think it's a bit of a difficult one, because it's hard to say that Air Canada, in essence, did anything wrong as per what their operating procedures might well have been. It's hard to really put fault onto the crew. Honestly, I think this is likely a massive oversight on Air Canada's behalf. But it's probably something they should have been well more knowledgeable on. I mean, Norwegian have got a 737 MAX 8 that was isolated in Iraq, that they couldn't get out, and it was in there for the best part of a year from memory, because they couldn't get parts for it. I mean, that should have been the indication to Air Canada that if you're utilising a US registered like airline number to operate your flight, you should still well clear. Although I think this is starting to get into a bit of like a confusing area, because there are a lot of dynamics and there are a lot of levels to how the rules of the air actually work, such as the right to fly between territory A and territory C over the land of territory B and stuff like that. When you start getting into these aspects of code shares, technically speaking, right, what Air Canada did do was illegal, as per the code of the air law. However, as it is a Canadian-owned aircraft, there is a case to be made. Technically, they didn't break the law. So it's a real delicate balance But I think all things considered with this particular story, Air Canada would probably just hold their hands up and go, yeah, that was our bad. Pay the fine and just move on. I mean, honestly, for Air Canada, it's like, it's not even a dent, really, is it, for what they've been making over the last couple of years in terms of profits. Although I think it's a bit of a cheap shot, personally, by the DOJ. I don't, or the DOT, sorry. I don't think it's a particularly point that they're trying to make. I don't think Air Canada did anything ultimately illegal. I mean, if it is a code share route, but I was under the impression that it's just code share flights are operated on flight numbers only, and they didn't actually fly under United Airlines code. Obviously, if they did, then that changes things. But my understanding was that those flights were operated under an Air Canada code with a Canadian registered aircraft. So, from my understanding, I don't think they're technically speaking done anything wrong. But I could be completely wrong here, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of people that are able to correct me on this.
Yeah, I think I think obviously Air Canada, they pointed out sort of various factors which led to those violations. So in one case, they had to use a Boeing 777-300 instead of a 787 on the Dubai to Toronto route. This change, sort of led to, longer durations in climbing to cruise, which, would cause the aircraft to enter restricted airspace. So, yeah, I think... Is it fair? Is it not fair? Again, there's so many grey lines there that, I think it's always going to be open to interpretation. Len, what do you think on this?
Yeah, I was going to bring up that point that Air Canada characterised the airspace transgressions as inadvertent, and as you said, James, they explained one of the situations as a change out of aircraft, which resulted in a change in the climb profile, which meant the aircraft essentially entered Iraqi airspace. The fact that they've kind of pointed that out suggests to me that they were aware of the requirement of maintaining a clearance from Iraqi airspace. So I don't know. I'm a little bit on the fence with that one. It's a Canadian aircraft, as you rightly say, operating, albeit under a US code sharing agreement. But the fact that they said they were kind of aware that the climb profile transgressed prohibited airspace with the change of aircrafts kind of smacks of the fact that they knew the requirements. Who knows? But I suppose it's a lookout for other operators in same situations with code sharing agreements.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's just, I don't know. It's to me, it just all seems a little bit weird. There's a lot of levels to this that don't seem to really add up. As Len rightly said, they've all but admitted fault and at the same time claimed their innocence. While at the same time sort of admitted they knew it was there, but then saying, well, we didn't really know though. It's just bizarre. You don't really know which way you want to sort of throw your opinion on this, because to be honest with you it's so easy to be wrong, because I don't really understand the legal implications of how a code sharing agreement works between two major carriers like that. I mean, I guess, for the basis of simplicity, we should probably say if they are flying from the UAE to the US as part of a code share agreement, irrelevant if they're a Canadian carrier, then they are, technically speaking, operating under an American-based license, in which case, then, yes, they should have followed the rules of the American airline that registered the code share agreement with them. But I don't know. Maybe... let me throw another idea out there, that potentially this is an oversight on United's end, that if they'd let them operate the flights as a code share, but having the US as a stopover, they could have kept the Canadian registration and have avoided all those issues.
Maybe so.
Maybe that was an oversight on both of the airlines. If they'd done it as a connecting service instead, then it wouldn't have needed to fly under a US carrier ID.
Well, I suppose it would fly under a United tag based on when you're at an airport and you see obviously your flight, it isn't just going to say the Air Canada flight number, the UA flight number, and what other code share partners they'll have within that. So I think the basis was it was a Canadian operated aircraft, but because United is an American airline, that's where the US DOT would have oversight, in that regard.
Yeah,
so
I'm just sort of looking at it on the basis of what Emirates gets away with, like how Emirates gets around that issue. So obviously, as you know, Emirates fall into the same problems, but to get around those code share agreement issues, they tend to land at other countries before continuing on to the major state. In the example of their code share agreement with Qantas, they stop at Dubai first before continuing on. And that completely alleviates the need to get around issues of flying under Canadian, like Qantas airline registration issues, and it completely removes the restrictions on airspaces. There's dynamics like that. There are ways around it by doing stopovers in certain positions. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it just wasn't feasible for those two carriers, and obviously for the Emirates, it's a completely different ball game because I guess the Middle East is the Middle East because it's in the middle of the East, so it makes sense that everyone to land there and then spread off again. But in the West, I guess we're all so compacted, it doesn't really make sense to have those hub formats to get around that issue.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's just a thought. A lot of airlines do it. BA stop over, and they used to stop in Dublin before continuing over.
Yeah,
to get around those licensing problems. So that there are a lot of ways around it, but I guess for those two carriers, it just ultimately didn't work. But that's fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess time will tell, and I'm sure it'll all come out in the end. So yeah, I think if we're happy to move on, we will go to a bit more sort of positive-looking news after we've just had, three relatively negative stories there. So,
James, nothing but positivity on this podcast.
Yeah, of
Bring
course.
Bring a smile to everyone's face, 1 sentence at a time.
Well, for Tom in particular, who's a massive fan of the Airbus A380, this news will no doubt be welcomed on your side. So early this week, Qantas have announced that they will deploy the Airbus A380 to South Africa for the first time with flights to Johannesburg. So maybe Len, you can give us a bit more info in this, seeing as you're our native Australian, and then we can hear Tom's thoughts as a massive A380 fan.
Yeah, fair call. I'll do it in my best Australian accent then, mate. So good news on a couple of fronts. So the A380 premiering in Joburg for the first time. What it essentially represents is a doubling of capacity on those routes, putting in the A380. The swap is going to add 130,000 seats annually on flights. I had a couple of interesting points here, and that kind of more relates to premium product. It's going to also see the return of first class on these flights. It's the first time for Qantas since 2018, and it also increases the number of premium economy seats, which I found a little interesting because there is this general move. I'm maybe sort of digressing a little bit, but there's a tendency globally, the market's shifting more towards premium product at the moment, and I think maybe you guys might have seen that at Farnborough. There was quite a bit of marketing and premium product on display there, wasn't there?
Yes,
quite a considerable amount.
Yeah. So I found that interesting. That it's not only the A380, which will appeal to all the ab geeks, including Tom, but it's also that move towards more premium product with Qantas as well, which is going along with the market the market shift. So yeah, very interesting, and trivia incoming. It's also interesting. There's a long history with Australia and South Africa. There's a very large South African diaspora in Australia. So those the South Africa routes are typically popular and well supported. And Qantas history with South Africa goes way back to the post-war years with its flight services. And a little bit of trivia, the first flights that Qantas ever conducted in South Africa was with an Avro Lancastrian aircraft in 1948, which was the civilian conversion of the good old Lancaster bomber. So interesting that we've gone from one of my all-time favourite aircrafts, the old Lanc, to Tom's favourite aircraft, the A380. What do you reckon about that, Tom, mate?
I am just going to sit back and take a big old sip of fair dinkumness.
Street. Fair sack of the sad, mate.
I've got my thongs down on the floor as well to slip them back on when we're all done. I'm going to start my segment of answering this question in the most controversial way possible. Just for a change, because I think, normally on this podcast we're a bit too negative for things. We should be trying to be more positive. So I just want to say to everyone listening, this doesn't really relevant to you. However, if your name is Roberto Liro, I want to thank you for all those years ago telling me that the A380 will never again return to the skies after COVID. And for anyone who else had that opinion, thank you for sharing that opinion with us. Unfortunately, you were wrong. And the A380 is indeed back. It's back with a vengeance. And I'm going to say something that's going to hurt every Boeing fan in the world. The A380 outlived the 747. It accomplished its task of killing it off. You don't have to agree with it, but it's the truth. Now, with that being said, back to the Qantas story. I think it's really good news. I'm quite happy. I'm positive. Really good outlook for Qantas. And particularly as Len was saying, because they're so popular in that South African connection service and it goes way back for them. I'd like to put the flagship, well, it's not really a flagship for them anymore, but I guess it technically speaking still is, technically. To have the first class reintroduced is definitely really interesting. And I think you are right, Len. There is definitely a massive shift of things going back to that premium status again. I don't know what's happened, but it's almost like the aviation industry is like resetting itself. I remember back in 2019, pre-COVID, we were talking about airlines ditching first class left, right and centre because they were like, nobody wants a premium product, everyone wants to fly for cheaper, low-cost carriers were booming, but even a low-cost carrier now offers a premium product. And so it's interesting how we sort of went from that, let's just get people from A to B and they'll be happy as long as it's cheap, to everyone's gone, I do want to get from A to B, but I want to be lavished on my way there. Yeah. And everyone's like, okay, let's reset. I mean, BA, perfect example. They have spent billions restructuring their airline and refurbishing their airline. Qantas obviously refurbished all their A380s and the new cabins do look incredible. The A350-1000s are going to look insanely cool as well. I can't wait to see what they look like when they're fully operating regularly. And I just think overall it's just a really good positive move for Qantas and a great move for the people of Joburg if you're looking to get to there. I don't know, but like potentially as well from an Airlink perspective, because they're co-chair partners, massively beneficial to them because they're thinking, well, that's thousands of more people every year that we get as a potential customer base. So it's potentially going to benefit them as well, even more in the longer run. So I think for Airlink, for Johannesburg and for Qantas all around, it's a spectacular thing to have the A380 flying in and out. And it is, quite frankly, a truly spectacular aircraft as well. I think you sort of... It looks a little bit out of place in some parts of the world, but if you've ever seen a video of the BA A380 or now the Qantas A380, was it will go there. If you see any videos of them landing in Johannesburg and Cape Town, they always look so majestic when they do it because they dwarf the surroundings around them. And like Africa's such a vast place anyway, to think that something can physically dwarf its surrounding is incredible. But yeah, it's very cool, very exciting news, and just incredible. And it's good to see Qantas are sort of on the right path again because they've definitely had some troubling times in recent years. And they've struggled a lot with their route networks and with their aircraft. So it's nice to see some positivity coming back from them and seeing that that good growth of first class coming back into their product line. Because honestly,
Absolutely.
I think from traveling perspective, I think we need to see a good first class product return. I mean, definitely the UK market's in desperate need of one, so hopefully Global will pull something substantial out of the bag as well. A little plug for
Yeah.
there on the podcast.
And speaking of which, just very quickly on the A380 front, Global's A380 repositioned to Dresden today.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, so that's flown the to Dresden for the maintenance base check.
Okay, brilliant. Well, obviously it was noted in the very first edition of this podcast about the maintenance deal that Global had signed with VFW to get its 380s. Yeah, back to a decent state, Tom?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. I just like, for me personally, I think it's nice to see the A380 making a re-emergence. But it sort of goes back to that point I made last week's in episode 1, where we were talking about like airport capacity. I mean, airports aren't expanding and they're not in a position to expand right now. So whether you see the A380 as a long-term success or a short-term success, irrelevant of how you view it, the A380 is an aircraft we need right now in the aviation industry. We're not in a place where we need the 777X per se as like a high demand. We need it right now. Rush it. If the 777X took another 2 years to get here, that would probably be the right time for it to arrive. Because right now, the A380 is by far the best aircraft to have in your service provider and fleet options. BA is a great example. Those New York JFK routes are insanely stacked up busy now. And if you're talking about Dublin as well and looking at capacity caps and all these things, I mean, other airports will look at the same thing. Schiphol's looking at capacity caps. An A380 in and out of these places is game changer for an airline if you have that in your arsenal to deploy. Because you can't just simply keep throwing 777s and Dreamliners at the issue in an attempt to try and fill the gaps. So, yeah, I think personally it's really good. And particularly right now with all the engine issues, one A380 being able to accommodate one Dreamliner or one 777 or one A350's grounding is the best thing ever for an airline. Right now. I'm not saying that the A380 is the perfect aircraft for the next 20 years, but I can't imagine we're going to see anything really come close to touching the A380 in terms of its quality and what it offers airlines for the next 20 years. I think we're looking at like a 10 to 20 year rebuild program for the aviation industry. Yeah. Because there's a lot of things that now need to be fixed as well, which I'll sort of talk about a little bit later, because I do want to plug our new partners today as well. But we'll get into that a little bit later after some other topics. But there is a lot of things that as an industry we now need to improve on and improve on fast, and that's going to cost a lot of money. And you can't do that if you're buying brand new aircraft. So utilising something that's there, ready-made, and is perfect for the job is brilliant. And I think Global will be a great success because of the A380. That's my personal take on it. I think it's going to work really well for them. And I think a lot of people have called it a little bit wrong.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, kind of moving on in, a sort of Airbus-esque theme, there is some big news this week from Airbus and Cebu Pacific. Cebu Pacific have kind of part firmed up a memorandum of understanding made back in July. Cebu Pacific are going to be taking 70 more A321neo aircraft. Quite big news on that front, particularly for Cebu Pacific. They're an airline that has been on the radar of the industry for quite a few years in terms of, their growth setup as an all Airbus fleet consisting of 320s, 321s, 330s, 330 neos as well. So Len, maybe you can give us a bit of further insight into this.
Yeah, well, as you say, Cebu Pacific, they've really been consolidating quietly, I suppose, in the region. Really set themselves up as a major powerhouse in the region, major operator of Airbus, as you say, both single aisle and wide body aircraft. They're currently boasting the youngest fleet, not only in the country, in the Philippines, but it's one of the youngest fleets in the world. So these guys have, I think, have come a long way in the last few years. they're certainly becoming, as a low-cost airline, they're certainly becoming a force to be reckoned with in that Asia Pacific region. But I think kudos to them that they're gaining sort of an international respect as well, which is really, I think, kind of nice to see for a regional low-cost operator like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I think the airline, obviously they're notoriously known for being a low-cost carrier, but I think in the context of the sheer exponential growth that the Asian market is going through in particular, I think Cebu Pacific have definitely sort of nailed their business model correctly. It is a bit daunting to think that they can fit 450 people into an A330neo in all economy. But when you look at the affordability behind that, I mean, you can go from Manila to Dubai for £150 return. I think it's either return or one way, one of the two. But for an 8 to 10 hour flight, I would rather pay that money and save a fortune than maybe potentially go down a premium route and pay, I don't know, maybe £1,500, £2,000 for a bit more of a premium product. So I think Cebu have definitely got their markets very tightly knit. They know exactly what sort of customer they want to go for, and it's clear that the model works because they're making money. They need to expand their fleets. It's as simple as that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really telling that what I personally think they've particularly done really well, rather than it being telling, is I think they've really perfectly expanded and grasped their market at the right time for the AirAsia fallout. Because you're sort of looking for that new emergence for carrier to really hit the nail on the head with marketing a low-cost all-Airbus fleet option in that area. And I know that they're not really at the point of doing what AirAsia and AirAsia X have done, but you can definitely see they're on the route to it. I mean, if I was AirAsia, I'd be very worried about the expansion of Cebu Pacific right now. I mean, that is an airline that has got a lot of potential and a lot of future in front of it. And not just serving the Philippines as well, but from where they're located, there's absolutely nothing stopping them from taking on Vietnam Airlines as well.
Yeah.
I mean, those types of prices and those types of rates, they can be really competitively hard to beat. And when you've got a model that works and works well, and you start running that into other countries, it's really hard for some airlines to compete against you. And it's ironic because we literally just talked about wanting premium product for travel and stuff like that. Yeah. But I think that's kind of a dependent aspect on where you are in the world. If you sort of look at the Chinese market and the Indian market, and particularly the Asian market is the perfect example for it. People aren't looking for a particularly premium product to travel. They're quite happy to pay a low rate and get from A to B, and they would rather have the money when they get to B to spend. And so it's kind of more of an understanding the market you're in, and I think that's where you have to give Cebu Pacific all of their laudits and have to just give them incredible amounts of respect to their name, because not only have they understood their market, they've taken years to accomplish this. They've done it slowly, they've done it right, they didn't over-expand, they retracted when they needed to retract, they pushed forward when they needed to push forward, they held their ground when the market shifted around them, and they never changed their business models, and now, well, sort of results speak for themselves. There they are. 70 aircraft confirmed for the A321neo family. And it's onwards and upwards for them, I think. Very exciting airline to see what's going to go on with the future. I would be interested to see if they consider things like we do know that Airbus have sort of roughly considered the idea of an A350-800. If that does come to be in existence one day, I wouldn't be shocked if you saw Cebu Pacific go for that.
Yeah.
No, definitely at all. Maybe the 900 and 1000 is just too big for the market they're operating in, but an 800 could be exactly perfect for what they're looking for.
Yeah, I agree. Len, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, in agreement. And isn't it nice to get a positive story?
What do you mean? Yeah. Very positive about Global?
No, there's certainly going to be a carrier to watch in the in the near future. They've just gone from strength to strength. So kudos to them.
Yeah,
definitely.
Brilliant. Before we get into the final segment of our Pushing Tim podcast, which is our incidents kind of section, Tom has an announcement to make regarding a new partner with Aviation Talks.
So we are really, really, really pleased to announce this one. It was announced yesterday on LinkedIn, but we have officially partnered with Disability Aviation. So there's loads of exciting stuff that's going to be coming as a result of that. You will be able to follow all of that on our YouTube, social media, and on our website. And if you do want to go check out the amazing work these guys are doing, on our website, it will either be live today or tomorrow, but there will be an entire page on our website dedicated to listing out all the work they do. It will have links to their website, a description of what their project mission is and stuff like that. But big shout out to Charlie and to Martin. We managed to speak to them both yesterday. Amazing people, amazing company, incredible vision, and yeah, we're so excited to announce this partnership because this is going to be big. This is the sort of change that we were talking about earlier. These are the type of changes that need to come to the industry, and we're really excited to be able to work with them alongside this and be able to assist them in their goals to achieve in that. And yeah, we can't wait to show you guys what we've got in store with them over the next year and a bit. We've got lots planned. There's lots of things going on. There's lots of things happening, but that's all to come. So please, don't forget to follow, subscribe, share the video, and please do go check out Disability Aviation. Check out their website, and that's pretty much it. It's a partnership, and we're really excited about it. It's incredible. It's amazing. It's the best thing to ever happen.
Yeah. No. So be sure to look out for the sort of collaborative pieces that we have in mind, with Disability Aviation in the short term and also going into next year as well. We are very excited to partner up with them. And if you're unaware of their cause, please do check them out. Brilliant. That's promotions kind of over for now, I believe, unless you want to talk eco program, Tom.
I will plug our eco program, but I won't do it straight after plugging Disability Aviation, because the work those guys are doing and the representation they're giving passengers with disabilities in aviation deserves its own plug and its own segment of the show. I don't want to surround it or drown it out by doing our own little side show, so we'll plug our stuff later down the line.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Well, in that case then, let's move on to our final segment of the podcast, which is, our more incidents and emergency kind of oriented section. So there were four kind of stories that we decided to talk about in this segment. The first one was a Air New Zealand A321neo in Wellington. At first, we believed it suffered a possible tail strike as a result of a hard landing, but the airline did confirm that there was no tail strike. However, the landing video, which you can see on our YouTube channel because we reported on this earlier this week, it was quite something, wasn't it, Len?
Yeah, things that go bump in the night. Yeah, absolutely. So background, it was a flight inbound from Brisbane. I'm going right off the top of my head. Brisbane into Wellington on New Zealand's South Island, and the aircraft suffered a hard landing. That seemed to be a bit of an understatement. It was 2.9 G. It was registered as, which is pretty substantial, eye-watering. Resulted in a skin wrinkling on the fuselage assembly, as I recall, and the aircraft diverted after going around to Auckland on the North Island. Interesting point, though, James, that I noted it flew the diversion at flight level 180 at 18,000 feet, which I thought was a little bit odd, because usually with the crew suspected a tail strike I think they reported it actually as a tail strike and then diverted. My kind of understanding was with a tail strike incident, you would make a repositioning at 10,000 feet as a precaution because of the possible pressurization issue.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, it was very clear that damage had been subjected to that aircraft as a result, because funnily enough, the aircraft was supposed to return to commercial service today, but the flights, those segments have been cancelled by the airline. So as it stands, the aircraft is, again, kind of looking at data from Radar Box here, it was also supposed to re-enter service tomorrow, but that flight has been binned off. So its next scheduled flight, as per Radar Box data, is expected to be the 6th of October, so in 2 days' time. But again, it'll be interesting to see whether they've fixed those issues with the aircraft as a result of that hard landing, or whether we're going to see it on the ground for even longer, maybe a couple of weeks, couple of months. Who knows at this stage?
Yeah, well, I think as Len alluded to, I mean, if they've got skin rippling on the fuselage, that is potentially a complete write-off for the aircraft, and that's maybe what they're sort of assessing right now, and they're likely waiting for Airbus to send out an engineer to really assess the damage to its full extent. I mean, I don't know if anyone has ever experienced a Ryanair landing. And they're not exactly the most pleasant things at times, as we'll discuss in the next topic very briefly. However, Ryanair, we've all had like a rough landing, and I know Ryanair get the cred for like a rough landing. 2.9 Gs. That's not rough. That's spine shattering. Okay?
Yes.
Like, I need people to understand the level of the force at which that aircraft hit the ground. I mean, honestly, we are so lucky, I think, that we've not seen a similar incident to... I can't even remember the airline now. There was that 737 that saw its main landing gear shaft go through the edge of the wing.
Oh, that...
Okay.
Yeah,
you know the one I'm talking about, right? It landed so hard it sent the gear shaft through the side of the wing on the inside on the inside of the wing where it attached the fuselage. It sent the gear through that. And that is a pretty standard thing that can happen with such extreme landings. I mean, I would dread to think the state that aircraft is potentially in right now. I mean, obviously they did manage to land it, but there is potential serious amounts of damage that have been done to it. I mean, we're assuming that the aircraft's main gears have been able to withstand that abuse. On the off chance that the fuselage isn't punctured from the shock of the gear going back up, it's likely that a lot of things are damaged. You've probably got sparring, like you probably have fracture cracks all over the place. Like, I think the PA-28 is a great example of that. The PA-28 is very prone on hard landings to developing fractures through its spine and through its ribbon. And I think the A320 roughly follows a similar sort of like design philosophy, where they use ribbon and then they use something else to bring its like textile strength to the actual fuselage. So it's likely that it's possibly suffered some slight hairline fracture cracks inside of its frame. And if it has received that, then it's a matter of working out, one, can they be plated up and the aircraft return to service? And if that is the case, that's going to take weeks to probably accomplish in terms of a maintenance task. And two, like, what is the sheer extent of the damage? Like, do we know for sure, based on the reports? Like, we know the airlines have confirmed, well, it was a hard landing, but a hard landing can mean any type of thing. Like, did the landing gear puncture anything? Did something fly up inside? Did the tires get damaged? Are the brakes ruined? Is the shaft actually cracked, or is it still in one piece? And I think Len's absolutely right as well. I'm quite surprised with such a substantially hard landing that they flew at 18,000 feet. That seems a little bit counterintuitive to me. I'm sure, well, hopefully, we get an Air New Zealand pilot that watches the podcast that can explain to us why they did that. There might be an operational procedure decision behind it. But as Len rightly said, I think if you report a tail strike, from my understanding, is you don't climb back to a pressurized altitude. And from what we see from the flight radar data, I don't think the radar box data, they didn't actually go back around and do a low approach over the runway to get a visual inspection done either. So
No, I don't think.
No,
Yeah, I don't think
so
they did.
it's a little bit bizarre to me as to the logic that the pilots have utilized there a little bit. That they know they've absolutely stuffed it, to put it bluntly, onto the runway, and they've bounced back up with the force they've hit the ground. But yeah, I don't know if they thought they hit the tail. That probably gives you an indication of how bad the G-force was. Like to think that the sound they heard was the tail scraping. That should indicate you how much crunching metal sounds there probably were as the gear shoved itself back into the main fuselage with great force.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I think we're quite lucky that aircraft didn't result in a crash, because that type of landing can result in a crash. I mean, we've certainly seen it before. There's a few thousand clips of older planes, as I'm sure you've seen when they're flying around in Africa and stuff. And I mean, I know those are planes at end of life, but it's not so much the lack of maintenance they have in Africa at times. It's the sheer force and the condition of the runway in which they're touching it down on.
Yeah.
We're lucky you didn't see the main gear get ripped off from that type of hit.
Yeah. I certainly didn't want to come across as an armchair warrior, sort of raising that sort of point about the return at flight level 180. Obviously, these guys would be carrying this out according to procedure. It was just kind of struck me as interesting that they would return at that sort of level and reposition the aircraft at least at that level to Auckland. But a bit of background context as well. The winds at Wellington at the time of the landing were gusting to 43 knots. So it kind of sounds like a weather-related incident and possibly wind shear, although there wasn't any sort of talk of that. But where Wellington is situated, with mountains and so forth, I would suggest it would be quite hairy at times with the kind of wind gusts you encounter there.
Yeah, particularly the downdrafting you get off the mountain ranges.
Yeah.
It can create really volatile winds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I know. I wasn't implying that you were an armchair warrior. I'm quite happy to be one.
Oh, no.
I'll quite happily sit here and I'll say it for loud and proud. Those Air New Zealand pilots, they endangered all the passengers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
when I reenacted this on my flight simulator, what I regard was.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't you hate that?
Oh, grief. Well, I think, as well as, the Air New Zealand incident, we, I think it was a particularly more busier week for Ryanair in terms of incidents. They had pretty much 2 incidents within sort of a 48 to 72 hour period, both in Italy. So Ryanair in Italy just not getting on at the moment. So the first incident came from Bergamo Airport, which involved Ryanair flight. It was a flight between Bergamo and Turin, and basically the aircraft suffered basically a tire decompression. The tire exploded during the landing process, so forcing the airport to temporarily close its runways. So that was incident number 1, and then incident number 2 was in Brindisi Airport, which was a rejected takeoff due to a compressor stall resulting in an engine fire. Incident number 2 was Brindisi Turin, and then the other flight was due into Bergamo. So yeah, it was quite a busy few days for Ryanair in that regard. An engine fire, tire explosion. Yeah, it's quite the week.
Yeah, the Italian Job featuring Ryanair.
Good.
Were they only supposed to blow the bloody tyres off where they land?
Well, yeah, it's funny how it works. A couple of showstoppers from Ryanair this week. In both instances, they were disabled on the runway, resulting in temporary closures and incoming aircraft diversions. So
No.
it was Ryanair's week this week.
Yeah.
I'm sure
No,
Mr.
definitely
Earlier would
was.
be really grateful to Eurocontrol to being able to facilitate all those diversions.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Very, very true. Good grief. Oh, wow. But yeah, so yeah, Ryanair's busy week in that regard.
Can I just ask quickly, tire decompression, is that official terminology for an exploding tire? Or is it something that Ryanair's just coined?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it was more my kind of preference on words that came out then.
Tire decompression.
Yeah, tire decompression.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go fully in there and just go, yeah, the tire exploded, you know.
Oh, so. I would have. I'd have gone guns in blazing. Yeah.
Yeah. No. But yeah. No. Yes. Tire explosion.
Well, the Ryanair famously, if always stated, it's far cheaper to buy new tires and brakes than it is to pay fuel for a long taxi. So I guess ultimately they got what they paid for.
Oh yeah, I suppose so. I suppose so when you look at it that way.
Famously well known for their saying of, "I'd rather a hard landing because a tire and a brake is cheaper than fuel."
Yes.
Something tells me that's not always strictly true, Mr. O'Leary, is it? I think it depends on the status at which your wheel is utilised. If it decides to suddenly detach itself from the aircraft at great speed in multiple directions, it's probably not cheaper.
I mean, I'd be very curious to see the maths on it. So, Mr. O'Leary, if you happen to have come across this podcast, we would very appreciate the maths.
Just reach out to us at james@aviationsourcenews.com and provide us all the details you can. Thanks.
Yes. Brilliant. So that kind of brings us to our final story, incidents-wise, and I think this one has got to be sort of story, of the week, month, maybe of the year. Due to
wasn't a rat, was it?
No, it wasn't a rat. No, it was.
This one was the bomb.
Yeah, it quite literally a World War II US bomb exploded underneath the taxiway at Miyazaki Airport in Japan this week. So the blast, which occurred on Wednesday, was confirmed as a buried 500-pound US bomb, which was dropped during the Second World War. It created a large crater in the taxiway, which ultimately disrupted airport operations. And it resulted in the cancellation of more than 80 flights in and out of the airport. It was quite, it was quite the damage there, wasn't it, Len?
Absolutely, yeah. And kind of interesting, we started the first podcast last week with a boom, and we're ending this one with a bang. So, quite an interesting story, actually. It's something you obviously don't think about, but as I've discovered looking into it, there's a hell of a lot of unexploded ordnance still in Japan from the Second World War. Miyazaki Airport, where the explosion occurred, going back in its history, was built in 1943 during the war. It was a training field for the Japanese Imperial Navy, and the kamikaze pilots flew their suicide operations from Miyazaki. So, of course, it got a lot of attention from America. There was an awful lot of ordnance dropped in and around Miyazaki. So,
yeah, I think, for me, the only thing I'm really shocked about by this is just, if right, that the Americans have come bomb something 80 years ago in the Second World War, there is a bulldozer operator out there right now in Japan. I want you all to just think about this for a minute. Somebody laid tarmac upon that bomb, steamrolled it, and bulldozed the area flat, and they're still alive, right? If you don't think there's such thing as luck in this life, right, I want you to go interview these people. Because they drove heavy machinery over an unexploded bomb. It lay dormant for 10 years after the expansion and tarmacking of that runway before it randomly exploded yesterday.
Yeah, and the interesting point, and you can read all this on the website, folks, an interesting point about that was the dimensions of the crater that it left. It was 7 meters wide, but the crater they reported was 1 meter deep, which made me think, was this thing sitting 1 meter under the surface? So, so yes, Tom, you're kind of saying that bulldozer guy, I reckon he would be buying lotto tickets tonight, because that's quite amazing.
If you worked on that airport, we want to hear from you. Reach out to us, james@aviationsourcenews.com. We can bring a translator on to help make it easier. But I am so curious to know as to what safety regulations went into just bulldozing an area where America had been dropping bombs for 5 years, and then somebody just went, yeah, just throw some tarmac on it, be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's still hundreds of tons of unexploded ordnance in Japan, and apparently they, to this day, they're still searching and removing them, and apparently quite often they appear during construction.
Oh, wow.
as excavations being done. So an unusual incident story again this week, but a very interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Let's be honest, we didn't think anything would top Ratatouille's exploration to Copenhagen, but yet here we are.
Yeah.
I've got to be honest. I'm a little bit petrified of the idea of saying I don't think anything will top this story as to what might happen next week. So, in the lieu of not wanting to hurt anyone out there, I'm just going to say that is a really interesting story. It would surprise me if something beat that next week.
Yeah, I will be stunned. Although this is the aviation industry we're on about here, it throws so many curveballs that,
yeah,
always
next week you'll log on and Breeze Airways have ordered A380s.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Neilman, if you've been listening to this podcast and you've got ideas now about getting the Super Jumbo.
Yeah, we do offer a 10% commission rate fee for our ideas and plans. If you'd like to write into us at info@aviationsourcenews.com.
Good grief. Well, I think, I think this week has been a pretty crazy week in terms of news. And with that, we'd like to thank you for watching. Tom, would you like to talk about the eco program before we let the lovely ladies and gentlemen disappear?
Actually, James, I will. Thank you. As you all know, independent media around the world is under attack. I know you've probably heard that line 1,000 times, but honestly, I promise you it really is. There's a lot of changes and regulations that have come in that have stopped outlets like ours and others from utilising those free ad-based services, which is where we used to make a lot of our revenue before, and it's left lots of new challenges. So if you would love to support the Aviation Source News project, the company, and help us continue to make content like this weekly for you and daily for you, then please do go check out and subscribe to our eco program. It is a Patreon-based subscription program. We offer 3 tiers, economy, business, and first class. But the reason we've called it an eco program is because we are the world's first media outlet, or aviation news media outlet, to partner with a charity, One Tree, where we plant 2 trees for every 1 subscription we get. So that's over half your subscription fees instantaneously. If we don't keep that, we give that back to the planet. That goes into planting trees to make the world a better and greener place for all. We are looking to offset our carbon footprint emissions, do our part to help save the planet. So if you would like to not just help save the planet, but also support our channel, please head over to our eco program. You can find it on our website. It's in the description of the video below. And please subscribe today. Just something as simple as our economy program. It's just $6 a month. Even that small amount can help us massively. We appreciate everything you guys do for us so far. Thank you so much to everyone that watches already. Thank you so much if you tune into our weekly podcast. Thank you to everyone that subscribed to the YouTube channel. Thank you to everyone that follows us on social media. But please help us make more content and bring more stories like we've talked about today to the forefront by checking out our eco program on avsn.co.uk. All the information in the description below. And that's the plug done. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Well, in that case, guys, thank you very much for tuning in to the Pushing Tim podcast. If you've enjoyed it, then be sure to like, comment, subscribe, give us your thoughts on the pressing issues of the week within the aviation industry. And for now, we will see you in the next edition next Friday. Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Av Geeks.